Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at a chapter from the book of Judges, and it's a pretty intense one, I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, definitely.
We're talking about chapter 21, and this is all about what happened after this brutal civil war between the Israelite tribes. It's really about the solutions they came up with to rebuild their society, and, well, let's just say it's going to give us a lot to think about.
Yeah, what we're going to see here is how this chapter really takes us beyond that typical, and they all lived happily ever after ending. We see how they grappled with some really tough questions about rebuilding, not just physically, but morally and ethically too.
So let's set the stage here.
Yeah.
Can you kind of paint the picture for us? What exactly happened in this civil war?
Well, it was a conflict between the tribe of Benjamin and then the 11 other tribes of Israel. It did not end well for Benjamin. They were pretty much wiped out. Only a handful of men were left.
Wow, that is heavy.
Yeah.
So what happened next?
Well, the other tribes, they were victorious, but you have to imagine, the weight of that victory. They were devastated by the near extinction of one of their own. And to make things even more complicated, they had sworn an oath, you see, in the heat of the moment, not to give their daughters to the Benjamites as wives.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that rash oath made in anger, and now it's coming back to bite them.
Yeah, exactly. They were trapped by their own words. So this oath that was meant as a punishment, now it was actually threatening the survival of Benjamin.
So talk about a moral dilemma. How did they get out of this mess? What did they do?
Well, they came up with a two-part plan. And both parts are, let's just say, pretty unconventional, even by ancient standards.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. I'm all ears.
Yeah.
What was the first part of their plan?
So first they discovered that there was this city called Jabesh Gilead, and the people there hadn't joined the war, and therefore they hadn't taken the oath.
So they were like the Switzerland of ancient Israel.
Pretty much. But their neutrality didn't save them. The other Israelites, they saw them as a solution to their problem. They sent soldiers to Jabesh Gilead and tragically killed all the men and any woman who was already married.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that took a dark turn. I'm guessing the solution involved the remaining women.
You guessed it. They spared 400 young virgins, and then those virgins were given to the surviving Benjamites as wives.
So they basically repopulated the tribe by force. I mean, I can understand their desperation, but that's pretty rough.
Yeah, and to complicate things even further, 400 women still wasn't enough to fully rebuild the tribe. They needed to come up with a plan B, and this one involved a festival and what we can only describe as sanctioned kidnapping.
Wait, are you serious? They encouraged kidnapping. Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat now. Tell me more about this plan B.
Okay, so there was this yearly festival in Shiloh, and this is where young women would dance in celebration. The Israelites basically told the remaining Benjamites to hide and abduct women from the festival to take as their wives.
Hold on, so they literally encouraged kidnapping. Did anyone object to this?
Believe it or not, this plan was approved by the elders. It's presented in the text as a solution, a way to ensure Benjamin's survival, even though it's obviously deeply problematic from a moral standpoint.
Wow, talk about complicated. On one hand, they're trying to save a tribe from disappearing, but on the other hand, their methods are morally questionable, to say the least.
Absolutely. It makes you think about those shades of gray, even within a society that believed it was operating under divine guidance.
Yeah, so what does all of this tell us about the kind of society they were living in?
Well, the very last verse of Judges 21, it kind of sums it up perfectly. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes.
And that seems to be the core issue. This lack of central leadership, this do what you think is best mentality. It seems like that led to all these questionable decisions.
Exactly. It highlights the potential dangers of a society that doesn't have clear leadership or, a shared sense of morality.
So how does this ancient story, as crazy as it sounds, connect to us today? I mean, it feels surprisingly relevant.
It is, and we'll get into those connections after a quick break, but we can already see some parallels to the challenges of navigating morality and leadership in a complex world, even today.
It's easy to sit here and judge the Israelites for their decisions, but it really makes you think, what would we do in a situation like that? It's a real-life ethical thought experiment, but with, way higher stakes.
It really is, and what really gets me is the lengths that they went to, even if the methods were, kind of morally ambiguous. They were so determined to save Benjamin from just disappearing completely. And, there's something to be said for that kind of resourcefulness, that commitment to a cause, even if we don't agree with every decision they made.
Yeah, I totally see your point. So let's talk about that resourcefulness for a second. I think it's easy to get caught up in the moral issues, but their problem solving was pretty impressive. I mean, not the kidnapping kidnapping part, obviously, but the fact that they came up with these elaborate plans to try and fix things.
Oh, absolutely. They saw the problem, the lack of wives for the Benjamites, and they came up with not one but two plans to try and solve it. And they didn't just give up. They actively looked for solutions, even if those solutions, led them down some questionable
It's
paths.
like you're thinking, wow, that's some outside-the-box thinking. Because you're also like, wait, did they really just do that?
Yeah, it really is a paradox. And, I think there's a valuable lesson in there about how to adapt and be determined when we're facing challenges. Of course, we're not saying what they did was right, but we can admire their tenacity, the refusal to just give up.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that sometimes the normal way of doing things just isn't enough. Sometimes we need to think differently, maybe bend the rules a bit, get creative.
Right, exactly. And think about it. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to come up with like a truly unconventional solution to a problem?
Oh, yeah, totally. I remember one time I got a flat tire in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't have a spare. I ended up using duct tape and a bunch of leaves just to patch it up enough to get to the nearest town. It wasn't pretty, but it worked.
There you go. See, that's that same spirit of resourcefulness. I think we all have that ability to think on our feet,
Yeah,
be creative and find a way, even when it seems impossible.
it's like that MacGyver instinct,
Uh,
using whatever you have on hand to fix something.
Precisely. But of course, we have to make sure we're not crossing any ethical lines in the process. It's all about balancing resourcefulness with responsibility.
Right, for sure. So we can appreciate their determination and creativity, but we also can't ignore the, problematic side of things.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to that bigger issue we touched on earlier, the idea that every man did what was right in his own eyes. It's a powerful statement that goes beyond just not having a king.
It does. It speaks to a much deeper issue, the potential dangers of, moral relativism. This idea that everyone gets to decide their own truth, their own sense of what's right and wrong.
And that feels so relevant today, wouldn't you say? We live in a world where there's so much emphasis on, like, individualism, on personal truth. It's almost as if everyone has their own moral compass, and they're all pointing in different directions.
Exactly. And when we don't have a shared sense of morality, a set of values that we all agree on, it just creates division and conflict.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap? What can we learn from, the mistakes the Israelites made and apply that to our lives today?
That's a great question. And I think that's really the heart of why this story is so relevant even thousands of years later. And that's what we're going to explore in the final part of our deep dive.
All right, so we've been really digging into this story from Judges 21, and I think it's safe to say it's pretty wild. But, beyond all the drama and the questionable choices, I think there's a deeper message here, don't you think?
Definitely. I think so. And I think that message comes through in that last verse we talked about. The one that says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes."
Yeah, it's almost like a warning, isn't it?
Oh,
Like a glimpse into what can happen when a society loses its way morally.
right, it is. And the thing about not having a king, it wasn't just about the politics. It was a much deeper issue, like a lack of shared values. Like they didn't have that unified moral code to guide them.
And it seems like that void, that lack of a shared foundation, is what caused so many of the problems. Like,
Yeah.
that rash oath they made and the violent solutions they came up with.
Totally. Like they were all operating in this moral gray area without a clear sense of what was right and wrong. And everyone was just doing what they thought was best. But without any real guidance, things just got out of hand.
It's kind of scary when you really think about it. Because if everyone's just doing whatever they want, who's to say what's right and what's wrong?
That's the danger of this moral relativism thing. It creates so much chaos and division because what one person thinks is right might be totally wrong to someone else.
Okay, so how do we avoid falling into that trap? What can we learn from what happened to the Israelites, and how does that apply to us today?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think it all comes down to shared values. We have to be willing to talk about the tough stuff, what we believe in as a society. What principles are we going to stick to even when it's hard?
So it's like we need that common ground, that shared understanding. So we're not just a bunch of individuals going off in different directions.
Exactly. And it's not about everyone agreeing on absolutely everything. It's more about having open and respectful conversations.
Yeah.
Listening to different points of view, but trying to find those core values that can actually bring us together.
Yeah, because if we don't have that shared foundation, it's so easy to get lost.
Hmm.
We start justifying actions that might not really sit well with us deep down.
And that's where good leadership is so important. We need leaders who are not only competent, but who really embody those shared values, people who can guide us through those tricky ethical situations and help us make decisions that benefit everyone, not just ourselves.
It's all about finding that balance between what we want as individuals and what's good for everyone.
Right, because true freedom isn't about just doing whatever we want whenever we want. It's about making choices that align with what we believe in, you know? Choices that help create a more just and compassionate world.
That's a message that never gets old, does
No,
it?
no, it doesn't. The story of the Israelites in Judges 21 is a powerful reminder of what can happen when things go wrong. It's a cautionary tale for sure, but it's also a call to action.
A call to really think about what we value and to look for leaders who inspire us and to do our part in creating a world where those values can actually thrive.
Because in the end, it's up to each of us to build a society where we're all striving to do what's right for everyone.
And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey through this ancient story. And as always, we hope you'll keep thinking about the lessons we've uncovered here. Until next time.